Hey guys, I'm Bill with SpecTrain. Thanks so much for tuning back into the SpecTrain YouTube channel. If you're just finding us, I'm a couple division GM in USPSA, a professional competitive shooter, as well as a full-time firearms instructor. I travel around all over the country helping folks learn how to be fast and accurate. And I've been at it for a while, and I had an idea recently for some new content for you guys, possibly spawned out of the fact that I'm a little bit lazy and hate dragging out all these cameras and stuff to the range all the time. And I said, hey, maybe I could just react to other people's content. But no, seriously, there's a lot of great content that comes out every single day on the YouTubes and on the internet about shooting and how to get better at shooting. But one of the biggest challenges that folks have is that there's also a bunch of content that's pretty terrible. And it's sometimes difficult to figure out, hey, what's good, what's not good, and how do I sort of differentiate between the really good stuff and the really bad stuff, if you will. So what we are doing is I'm having our alumni in our alumni group on Facebook to start with submit video content that they would like to have me take a look at and give you guys some of my feedback on that content. What I'm hoping is we get a chance to highlight some content that is really, really great, point out some folks that are doing it the right way and putting out really good quality information. Maybe we'll encounter some folks that I disagree with. In those cases, I'm going to try to keep it as professional and respectful as possible. We're not going to be reviewing people and whether I like or dislike those people. Rather, we're just going to focus on the training. And if we have disagreements about the best way to approach training, I'll be more than happy to break those down. But please don't go attack anybody or anything like that. The entire idea is just hopefully to review training and learn a little bit and come away with some good stuff. And of course, I think most of it will be somewhere in the middle. I think most of the folks that we see in this regard have good things that we can learn from, and maybe some things that we might set aside or disagree with as well. In this pursuit, I think it's only fair that the first person that we review or critique on this channel is none other than me. I think the title of this video will be something about a tactical Timmy or something of that nature. And of course, we all have our roots probably in that sort of thing. So here we go. This video is going to have probably way more vein-laden cryptech, if you will, and multicam and so forth than you're used to seeing from me these days, and probably a lot of shooting techniques that are usually reserved for the tactical Timmy types. I basically went back and dug up the oldest video from me that I could possibly find on shooting technique. This is not even available on the internet any longer, thank goodness. But we're going to dive in. We'll see if there's anything worth knowing of value in this video, and I'm sure I'm going to disagree with a whole bunch of stuff that I used to think was probably like gospel about 6 years ago when I came out with this video. Let's dive in and see what we are in for today.
One of the main things that I see from new shooters that they can easily change up and it will drastically improve their shooting is their grip on the firearm. A poor grip causes so many problems, and a strong grip can actually overcome problems in other areas, right? If you have a really good grip on this gun, a lot of times you can have poor trigger control or whatever the case may be and make up for it because your grip is still holding the gun rock steady and not letting it go.
So far, so good.
So what I want to do when I'm shooting is I want to grip the gun firm enough
that oh my goodness. Look at all of that that's some good stuff right there. I'll withhold my comments until we hear if there's any explanation for this.
That it's not going anywhere, but I don't want to death grip the gun. I see a lot of shooters, especially if your grip strength isn't necessarily right where it needs to be, they literally just muscle the gun so much you start seeing this like tremoring in the gun when they're trying to shoot. Don't try to squeeze the gun to death. You want it firm enough that it's not going to jump out of your hands, but relaxed enough that you can just hold it rock steady.
This is an interesting take for sure. The sort of Parkinson's shake, if you will, the tremor that I demoed there is definitely a thing if you are putting a certain level of grip tension into the pistol. However, it's very rare to actually see a shooter doing that. It's usually an issue that corrects itself immediately as you're trying to aim, and you immediately realize that your hands are shaking because you're squeezing the pistol so hard. What is way more common is people not gripping the gun hard enough. And if there's one thing that is probably universally agreed upon among top shooters, that you need to be essentially crushing the gun with that support hand. Your connection to the gun is essentially a product of friction, which is directly a product of how much of your hand is actually touching the gun and the amount of pressure that you're able to put into the gun. Additionally, I think the more pressure you put in, the more you are locking that gun down, to use a phrase that I think I used earlier in this video, which will help the gun to not move when you press the trigger really quickly, in the event that sort of the pressures in your firing hand, instead of just moving the trigger finger, if you have any pressure changes in this hand as you press the trigger, a good locked down support hand, a really strong support hand grip will help that gun move. So interesting place to start here for sure. Let's see if we get any better explanation here.
The other thing is, you don't want to hold it so hard that you can't move your trigger finger, right? If you're gripping it so hard that you start feeling tension and it's difficult to move this trigger finger, that's going to cause you problems as well.
So I'm really hoping that I was not completely clueless here, and I'm going to explain this. But what I seem to have jumped over entirely here is that your pressures do not have to be the same between your firing hand and your support hand. Obviously, the support hand is the primary hand when it comes to recoil management and generally locking the gun down to prevent it from moving in ways that we don't want it to move. The firing hand is essentially its only job is to press the trigger without moving the gun. And therefore, trigger finger dexterity as well as trigger finger isolation may result in a firing hand grip that is significantly more relaxed than the support hand grip. Obviously, relaxing your support hand could not possibly have anything to do with making your trigger finger difficult to move. So, we'll see.
What I'm going to do with my left hand is even more important. A lot of shooters have what they call a thumbs up grip, right? And it looks something like this when you're shooting. Your thumbs are kind of up, right? Now, the trouble with this is that my wrists are not locked in place. They're just being held in place by muscle tension. So when the gun goes off, it has the ability to move like this in my hand, which is obviously not preferable. What I'm going to do is actually push this thumb forward as far as I possibly can to lock that wrist down. Okay, so if I open my fingers up right now, you'll notice they're pointing down at the ground. They're not pointing straight in front of me. So when I grip this gun, my thumb is going to slide all the way forward as far as I can get it, somewhere here above the top of the trigger guard. So when I'm shooting, it's going to look something like this right here. Now what that's going to do is lock that wrist down.
Okay, there's some principles here that are correct, but the application, to be completely honest with you, is dead wrong. Let me explain. Wrist lock is a thing. If you grip the pistol the same way that you would throw a punch, if you will, where your fist is basically in line with your forearm, right? And I was to grip the pistol like so. The only thing that's keeping the pistol flat on target is equal tension top and bottom of the forearm. So, of course, when I tip those scales with recoil, I'm never going to be fast enough to pull down extra hard with the bottom of that forearm and keep the gun flat. And so the gun will basically blow straight through the wrists, and I'm going to have wrist flop. The main issue there is not that it doesn't look great or that the gun isn't super flat. The main issue that there is that when the muzzle lifts in recoil, the only way for me to get it back from that position is to basically yank it back down, and it's going to be very hard to yank it down and stop it on a very specific spot. And I'm going to get an inconsistent return in 0, right? So with the obviously anecdote to that, I do personally still believe is wrist lock. So instead of gripping neutral, I will roll that wrist forward. However, that certainly does not mean the only way to achieve wrist lock is not to roll that thumb all the way forward and over crank that elbow. That is incorrect. With my wrist locked, my hand can be in a variety of different places on the pistol, depending on what you do with that elbow, right? So, as an example here, if this was me gripping neutrally, I'm going to go ahead and roll that wrist all the way forward to where it's totally locked, right? I feel all the tension down here is cranked down. I'm feeling a stretch along the top of the forearm here. And of course, depending on, again, where I put my elbow, if I have my elbows pulled in close to me and really collapsed, my thumb is up high, right? But, or maybe my hand is to the rear, but my wrist is rolled forward as far as it can be. Obviously, the more that I extend that elbow, the more that wrist is going to cam forward, and that thumb is likely to cam forward. But that's very much dependent on how much elbow extension that I have, which is a completely separate thing from wrist lock. I do not these days recommend locking out the wrist or over camming the arm in the fashion that I'm demonstrating here. Wrist lock is still a thing. You just don't have to over cam the arm to do it.
So what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and go hot when I'm shooting, is that the gun really doesn't move when you squeeze the trigger.
Correction. The gun was moving quite a lot.
The other thing I see people doing sometimes to control recoil is they like to put a finger in front of the trigger guard like this. It seems to work for some people, but it's really poor idea because it's causing you normally to rotate your wrist more up than out. If I rotate my wrist all the way out like this, I can't really reach the top of that trigger guard. So the most important thing is to drive that thumb forward.
This is an interesting point. Couple things. Number one, the probably best action pistol shooter to ever live, Eric Recoil, absolutely does use a grip where he wraps a finger in front of the trigger guard. A couple things to keep in mind there. I don't know. Actually, I haven't talked to him about it. Eric's thoughts on wrist lock. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask him about that next time I see him. But what I will say is, again, one of the things I used to really think was, that with the arms locked out, if I lift that finger up in front, it's kind of causing me to unlock the wrist. However, if I collapse the elbow, I absolutely can still have the wrist locked when it's hooked in front of the trigger guard. What that finger hook in front of the trigger guard kind of allows you to do is get a little bit of a push-pull mechanic getting going into the pistol. What you may notice, though, is that I had to take my weapon light off the pistol to make that happen, right? To get that finger hooked around in front of the trigger guard. Eric, the guy I was talking about that uses that grip, is a Frenchman who is not allowed to carry a gun or use a gun for anything other than competition, and therefore everything he does is specifically for competition performance shooting. Obviously, for most of us over here in the States, that's not our primary motivating factor. Although I am a competition shooter, my primary motivation is for concealed carry, daily carry, and personal defense. And for that, I carry a weapon light. Or at least I want the ability to shoot with a weapon light. And I don't want multiple different grips that I use based upon equipment, which is why most of us in the States try to figure out a grip that actually works with that finger back under the trigger guard. So finger in front of the trigger guard, I would not be able to say is wrong. Again, some of the best shooters in the world use that grip. It's just not applicable for every context. So once again, I was wrong about this.
Now what I'm going to do is actually control the gun predominantly with this grip with my support hand. It's actually got way more to do than my primary hand does. Because
maybe I'm finally going to talk about the difference between grip pressures in the support and primary hand. Let's see.
My primary hand, I can't rotate, right? It's square because the way the grip is. With my support hand, though, is actually going to take the leading role in controlling recoil and driving the gun around, leaving my support hand to mainly worry about activating the fire controls, i.e. squeezing the trigger.
So far, so good. Absolutely no reason to use terms like fire controls.
So if I go full speed, it's going to look something like this.
Wow, that looks terrible. So this is actually a really great example of why I don't recommend locking those elbows out. I don't know if my elbows were totally locked out there, but there's way too much tension going on. I don't recall ever thinking that locking the elbows out was a good idea, but it certainly looks like they're pretty much locked out there. And what you'll notice is, if we go back, let me see if I can get this to work. If we show where I start this, okay, I want you guys to look right where basically my shoulders are. It's not going to show my cursor on this, but if you look at where my shoulders are on the brick wall, and then you watch how my entire body gets pushed back to the rear in recoil as I shoot the string of fire. Right, so you can see all my shoulders, my entire body gets pushed to the rear as I'm shooting that string of fire. Yes, it's a 40 cal pistol, but yes, I'm shooting a compensated barrel, which made a marginal difference. But even with 40, we should not be seeing that shift in body positioning throughout that string. Here's why that has something to do with locked out elbows. Again, the analogy I kind of use for this is like the thing about the wheels in your vehicle. What you wouldn't want is your wheels just connected with rigid iron to the body of your vehicle. If you did that, every single bump in the road would transfer that energy straight up into the body of the vehicle. If you now think about the structure behind your pistol, if what I do behind the gun is lock all this stuff out, well, then the energy of the pistol is just going to be transferred right back into the body of the shooter in this case. In your vehicle, what do you want? You want those springs, right? You want those leaf springs. You want those shocks to actually connect your wheels to the chassis, right? So that you have that give, not to fight the bumps in the road, but to absorb the bumps in the road. We want the same thing from our structure behind the pistol. So where are the springs found in our shooting structure? Well, behind the hands, in the elbows, and in the shoulders. So instead of getting super rigid and locking everything out behind the gun, the more I can relax all this and reduce the tension so that when the pistol fires, I can actually absorb the energy in the elbows and shoulders. Now a lot of that energy will not get transferred back. It's not going to be pushing me around. I'm going to have far less fatigue, and I'm actually going to have far better ability to absorb recoil. So that's actually exactly why I don't do this anymore. Okay, well, that was about as much as I could stand of that. That just goes to show, folks, that as we go through this series, whenever we point out things that we disagree with or know better from modern techniques and training practices in pistol shooting, we're not saying that the people who are making these mistakes or people saying things that we disagree with are evil and wicked and should be banned from teaching or from the internet. Hopefully, we're all continuing to grow and learn every single day, let alone year that goes by, and are constantly going to be open to new ideas and to learn new things. I strongly believe everything that I teach today is true, right? But I am open to the idea that in a few years I'll probably have some different ideas for sure about shooting. What I went ahead and grabbed is the oldest video from me on shooting that's actually currently available. This is a current video that's on the Spec Train channel. Let's have a look at this one for a little bit, and we'll see how we feel about this. This was a couple years later after the video that we just saw. So I think quite a bit has changed by now, by the time this video was filmed. The beard certainly has improved. And there's less multicam, right? So all of this is good things. But let's take a minute and look at this, and we'll see what we come up with.
What do we need to do to quickly move the gun from one target to another, or even from like a low ready position to a presentation? It's all kind of the same idea. It's finding the target with your eyes, getting your gun to where your eyes are, and being able to engage that target as quickly as you can. There's a couple things we'll talk about mechanically with transitions that we find will help you make you really successful. As far as actual turning of the body, we've spent the morning essentially building a platform behind this gun that enables us to control recoil well, have a natural point of aim for our dot or our sights to return to zero effectively. All that's really important. So when I start transitioning to multiple targets, what I don't want to do is compromise that. So as an example, if I'm shooting right here and this is my natural stance, what I don't want to do is start like bending one elbow or twisting my shoulders or whatever to get from where I am now to where I want to be. As much as possible, I want everything from the hips up to stay the same, so my platform behind the gun is not compromised. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of float on my knees and on my feet from one target to another. So if I'm transitioning kind of from center to right, all I need to do is take this left knee and essentially point it at the target, and I should be able to transition pretty quick to that spot without compromising the way my arms and my hands, the alignment with my sight picture, all that kind of stuff.
So far, so good. I actually agree with this, although I'm well aware that some good shooters think about this a little bit differently. I think that basically the entire point of the structure behind the gun is to get it to behave in a predictable fashion in terms of recoil control and get it to really consistently return to zero, which requires a really delicate balance of tensions. And if you do anything to compromise that, there's definitely the possibility that your gun is behaving less predictably. So I don't like changing things in the shoulders and in the arms to get my gun to move from one target to another. Using everything below the hips and those knees and feet and so forth is important. You don't need to over-exaggerate it like I was doing for the point of the teaching benefit here, but I agree generally in principle.
What's tempting for a lot of folks that like to stand with their legs pretty locked out while they're shooting is instead of using the knees and getting those engaged, is to kind of just twist with your legs. Now this can work, and it'll especially work on nice short transitions like we're working on today for our kind of our basic level. Where that gets you in trouble is at the longer of a transition you go, the transitions tend to be spongy. What I mean by that is, as I go from one target to another, instead of having a solid stop, I kind of have to settle into position once I get there, right? Because there's all this momentum, there's not a whole lot to absorb that because my legs are locked. So just kind of like trying to turn really abruptly, and a lot of times when I get there, it's kind of shaky as I try to zero in on the target.
Actually, so far so good. Again, I actually do kind of agree with this. More importantly, what that legs locked out sort of posture does is it does not set you up to be ready to move quickly in the event that you need to explode out of that position, either because you need to get to another location quickly or because you simply don't want to be where you are any longer in more of a defensive scenario. So having that lower stance where your feet are spread apart but your knees are actually bent a little bit, I do find helps with your transitions, but also helps you prepare to move, which is probably even more important.
Whereas if I can engage these knees, what I find personally, is that I'm able to drive from one target to another really aggressively and just kind of land right where I want to be. The other thing we'll talk about that's really, really important with your transitions is visual processing. What are your eyes doing? How are they steering the gun? Visual processing is a really undervalued part of shooting, but the bottom line is you gotta see better in order to shoot better. So the important thing with transitions is your eyes need to lead the gun to where it's going, not the other way around. What's really easy, especially if you're shooting with an optic, but also with iron sights, if you're shooting with front sight focus, is to get locked into your sights and to move your gun, your eyes, and your head all as one unit where they never become separated. And where that leads to issues is that I don't know where I'm going with the gun. In an artificial scenario like this where I know where the target is, I know the direction I need to move with the gun, but I don't know exactly where I'm going. So a lot of times, like if my target was here, as I get there, I'll either overdrive the gun where I'm like, oh yeah, there it is, and I have to come back. Or sometimes if I catch it in my peripheral, I'll even start shooting early before I get there. And we see a lot of times when our eyes get locked into our sight package, either overdriving or underdriving the target. What'll help you be nice and quick, but also very accurate, is if you can break your eyes out of your sights, find the target, and then the gun will follow. Now what this doesn't mean is I'm gonna shoot target number one, bam, bam, I'm gonna stop here, look, and then transition, right? That would be inefficient. What it means is that even if I start moving both together at the same time, I can move my eyes so much faster than my gun that I will outrun the gun, see where the gun is going, and be able to snap the gun to where I'm looking. Does that make sense?
So far, so good. Again, yes, vision is absolutely crucial when it comes to the precision of your transitions. Getting the gun to actually land in the middle of the target, that's where you want the gun to actually stop, is not going to happen unless your eyes are giving the gun very clear instructions on where to actually land.
You can get your eyes ahead of your gun to the target, you'll find that you're able to start shooting a lot sooner once you get there, and that your shots will actually be more accurate. The other concept I'm going to introduce is that in the same way we talked about earlier, that how fast we pull the trigger is not related to how fast we release the trigger. Remember how those two things can be done at separate speeds? The same thing goes to our transitions. So if I have a precise target where I really need to get a precise shot, either because I'm going maybe for a headshot or because it's a shot at distance, whatever the case may be. Just because I'm shooting slowly does not mean I'm going to transition slowly. Everything except pulling the trigger can always be done at 100% speed, because that's all just inefficiency and wasting time. For example, if I'm going to shoot a target really far at the end of the range and I'm going to draw, just because I'm going to shoot really far and it's going to be a slow shot doesn't mean I'm going to draw slow, right? Same thing goes with my transitions. Even if I'm shooting slowly, I'm going to transition quickly. So instead of going 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, what that can look like is 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, right? So even though I'm shooting slowly, I'm still driving the gun just as aggressively as I would otherwise to the next target. We're going to work a little bit on forcing you to separate those concepts.
Actually agree with this as well. Yes, the transition mechanics do not really change in my mind depending on how precise of a target you are going to. This is not universally agreed upon, but is generally agreed upon, I would say, by top shooters. Some folks have the idea that you want to adjust how basically soon you're putting the brakes on or how carefully you're bringing the gun onto the target, depending on target difficulty, to make sure that your gun is landing on target good enough. What this does is obviously forcibly increases the time of the transition from one target to another if it's a more difficult target. It ensures your gun is getting there later, and it's turning it into more of a timing exercise, the way most people think about it. So instead of bringing the gun from point A to point B, stopping it, and then pressing the trigger, I'm basically bringing the gun over more carefully and trying to go, okay, right about there, and then press the trigger sort of as the gun carefully lands on target. No matter how carefully you bring the gun, I think you're always going to be more accurate shooting with the gun stopped on target than you are going to be trying to bring it over and stop and shoot while it's still moving. So what I would prefer to do is get the gun on target as quickly and precisely as I can, at least some of the time, especially the better shooter you are. The gun's going to actually land in the right spot. So the gun's going to come across, stop, bam, I can shoot immediately because the gun actually did land precisely in the right spot. Of course, if you're not very good yet, or even if you're a great shooter, but you're just still imperfect and don't always do everything perfectly, like all of us, maybe that you look and the gun lands at the wrong spot and you have to bring it back and then shoot, right? I still think in the aggregate, you're going to be more accurate by shooting with the gun stopped, and you're actually going to be faster. It is faster to go, nope, there, bam, than it is to go, whew, bam, right? Just bringing the gun in really slowly and carefully. So I do agree. That's some nuance that maybe I didn't fully understand at the time, but I definitely agree still that our transition mechanics do not really change depending on how careful the target is, or how difficult the target is, rather.
Concepts by giving you a nice slow cadence of fire for your first rep and then picking it up as we go, and we're looking for the same speed of transitions essentially throughout each rep. One of the tools we'll use to see whether we're doing that correctly or not is by using a cadence of fire. So for some folks that are used to doing double taps on targets, if you were to shoot 2 rounds on these 3 targets, what it would kind of sound like is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as you transition through. What we're going to push for is for it to sound like one even cadence of fire. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, we're not suggesting that in a real world gunfight you need to try to shoot on a metronome. But what we are using that as a tool for is making sure there's not an unnecessary gap in our transition. So we're going to push that through. So let me demo this really quickly. If everyone can get eyes and ears, I'll give you an idea of what I am talking about. So If I was to do this incorrectly, and I was going to double tap each target, kind of confirm where my shots were, and then move to the next one, it might sound something like this, right? So yeah, I hit my target, but it was inefficient because as soon as my second shot was done, I let my sights come back down on target, kind of checked that out, saw what was going on, drug the gun over the next target, and double tapped again.
Not a great demo. I did that on the first target, and then I did the exact opposite and transitioned pretty properly the next two targets, although I waited for the cadence to press the trigger. Side note, this isn't really relevant to the video, but sucking at shooting is not very difficult. We all suck at shooting sometimes. But sucking at shooting exactly the way you want to suck at shooting on demand is more difficult than you might think. And getting good at these kind of demos is definitely something that you end up putting a lot of work in as an instructor. Like how to actually shoot the wrong way when you mean to is more difficult than you might think.
If I was to smooth that out, even if it results in me slowing down my shots, it might sound something more like this. Right? So nice and smooth. It just sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as we kind of go across it. Now again, for the first cadence of fire, we're going to ask everyone to try to go nice and slow to ensure that that concept is nailed, that how fast we're shooting is unrelated to how fast we're transitioning. So if I tell you to go really slow, 1001, 1002, what that kind of looks like something like this. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1000. So even though I'm shooting really slowly, I'm still driving the gun to each target. Does that make sense, everybody? If my hits on the target are telling me that I can afford to go faster, we'll have you speed up. So maybe we'll have you do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something of that nature. What that might kind of look like is, if my hits are still telling me I can afford to go faster, again, same thing as before. We'll say, take the training wheels off, let's push it, go full Ricky Bobby, get a little bit uncomfortable with it, see what you got. That might look something like this. And I know I had at least one out, upper left corner, still on paper there. Not 100% sure about all those because we're just getting crazy fast at that, right? It's not necessarily realistic, but we're pushing that mechanic to see, okay, how fast can I actually drive this thing before the wheels start to come off, right? Again, don't be afraid to miss. We're trying to hit everything, but don't be afraid to push past what your current skill level is. That's the only way you're going to get better, is by pushing past what you can do currently, either finding out where the wheels fall off and something that you can fix, or saying, you know what, with where I am right now, I just need to back off a smidge from that level. And this is where I can live at. That's kind of my maximum peak performance zone. I kind of have an idea of how fast I can shoot at this distance, how fast I can transition, and still get good quality hits, right? It's kind of
Okay, so we're finally getting to something. I thought that I would likely disagree with more things from this video, being that it was, I think, 4 years ago. So far, we've agreed with most of it. We're getting to some stuff that's a little more controversial, maybe some things I would definitely teach a little bit differently today. Let me say a couple things. Number one, some instructors, I think nowadays we tend to demonize teaching with cadences at all. I don't teach with cadences in this fashion anymore, but I also don't teach nearly as many like beginner style classes as I used to. Cadence can be useful for some exercises, largely to basically get students to push themselves in a way they might not do under their own control. You can say go faster till you're blue in the face, but until you force students to actually try going at a certain pace, it can be very difficult to get students to actually go fast. And so using these cadences can have learning value. Where I would disagree pretty strongly with the thing I just said is that what we're trying to do is shoot different paces and use those paces to discover sort of our threshold for how fast we can shoot, and basically use that to learn how fast we can shoot on different like difficulty targets or certain personal thresholds, that kind of thing. I think about that very differently today. I do not think exploring different difficulties of targets or different sizes of transitions or any of that sort of thing in terms of speeding up and slowing down is very useful, because again, maybe these students just found out how fast they can shoot at, I don't know, 7 yards or whatever the distance was. But if I put them then at 5 yards or 8 yards or 10 yards? Do they know what to adjust specifically between those different distances to still get those hits that they want at speed? And the answer I would suggest is probably not. So that lesson on how fast you can shoot is not particularly useful, because unless you know exactly how far to speed up or slow down. Additionally, speed and accuracy are not really competing efforts. Like if you're missing at speed, the reason is not really because of the speed that you were going, right? Presumably, there's probably someone in the world who can hit stuff at that speed. So the issue is not really the speed you were going. The issue is that you didn't aim carefully enough, i.e., your dot wasn't acceptably back on target, or your sights in this case, and you sent it anyway. Or you move the gun when you press the trigger. Those are, in fact, the only two ways to miss when shooting. That's it. If you don't do those two things, you will hit the target 100% of the time. So if you're not aiming carefully enough, or you're moving the gun when you press the trigger, and all I have you do is slow down, man, it's very possible you're just missing slower now, right? And so the fix should not be to speed up or slow down based upon target difficulty. The fix should be to have a really good understanding of what you need to see and how you should press the trigger on targets of varying difficulty to guarantee hits at speed. I've got a whole separate video on this that's current on the channel. It's really good. It's on confirmation. It's called Confirmation Levels. Look that one up if you want to learn more about that process and how I see that now. But anyway, this was an interesting trip down memory lane for me. I hope it was interesting and useful to you guys as well. But it was fun to look back on some different videos from years and years ago and explore, hey man, what was some good things? What was some bad things? What were some things maybe in the middle? And I like looking back on things like this myself to see, man, what are some things I was teaching, in this case, just a few years ago, that maybe I might look at very, very differently down the road. And it helps keep you humble and keep you open to new ideas. I hope you will enjoy it as we start reviewing footage from other folks as well. If you have suggestions on videos from across the internet that are either really, really good or really, really bad or somewhere in the middle, definitely feel free to drop those down below and I will have a look. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.